Welcome to today's webinar. Is Canada's sovereignty at risk, fragile, and under siege? Over the past several years, and in fact, specifically this year, many of our discussions have circled around the question of Canada's sovereignty, whether it's eroding, at risk, or if some have said quietly slipping away. The quip from the current US president about Canada becoming the 51st state of the United States may have been delivered in jest, but it landed with force because deep down, Canadians understand something uncomfortable. The greatest threats to our sovereignty may not be coming from the United States at all, may be coming from within. We face interprovincial barriers that block our own internal trade more than foreign competitors do. And we have a vast northern territories with immense economic promise, but little development. Our defense capabilities remain thin to the point of dependence on the US, and we hesitate on executing an energy strategy, on our infrastructure, and on large-scale innovation. And while our economy, culture, and technology are deeply integrated with America, our ability to negotiate confidently with the US depends first on our own capacity, our own unity, and at home. Well, tonight's conversation is part of our ongoing series on getting to yes with the USA, but with a sharper lens. This time, how can Canada say yes on its own terms if it can't solve its own internal challenges first? Joining us again is William Jones, Bill to me, entrepreneur, strategist, longtime observer of US-Canada dynamics, and proponent of an Alberta economic embassy. I might ask Bill in the introduction to elaborate a little bit of what that initiative is all about. He brings decades of experience navigating how nations and organizations maintain leverage, maintain their identity, and resilience inside highly isometric relationships. So, Bill, thank you for joining us. Let's get started. Give us a little bit of color, though, beforehand, or before I start posing questions to you, about this Alberta Economic Embassy. What's it all about, and how did you get involved?
So about 2 years ago, I started a program to save a heritage building in Edmonton called the Old Glenora Museum, Royal Alberta Museum. And part of that was to create a concept for reusing that building. And what we've done is we've combined sovereign compute capacity, a finance center, and a diplomacy center all together in one spot. Joining all three really highly required things within Alberta and for Canada as well, where the sovereign compute, where we have the data and computing power to manage and support our own government and financial institutions and other core companies without dependency on the US providing the cloud services. And for Alberta, a finance center and a diplomacy center to coordinate capital and political connections with it throughout the world. So that's the project we're doing at Glenora. It's pretty substantial, and we're working with the government to move that forward.
Okay. Well, and I'm sure in the course of our discussion or our Q&A later on in the webinar, people might want to ask you for a little more detail. So, Bill, before we talk about U.S. pressure, what do you see as the internal weaknesses most undermining Canada's sovereignty today? We've noted interprovincial trade barriers, policy fragmentation, slow execution, underinvestment in critical sectors. Which of these, if others, is doing the most damage, and why? Why the reluctance of Canada to attend to these issues?
So you raised all 4 points. The big one is we're broken internally with our trade barriers between provinces. I mean, right away, it's $200 billion a year lost economic output right there. That's such a serious self-inflicted damage and directly weakens our sovereignty. Because if we can't even trade with ourselves internally, we're going to have difficulty trading with someone like the United States. And as you pointed out, we have a serious execution deficit. We are really good at announcing things, but we really struggle to deliver these things. I mean, just think of any of the major projects, energy projects, ports, rails, transmission lines. by the time we are done consulting and fighting in courts and re-announcing it, the world's moved on, such as our LNG exports to Europe are now all taken by the United States. So the world is deglobalizing and it's becoming regionalized. And in a deglobalized world, speed is the asset, and we certainly don't have it. And then, of course, we have our energy schizophrenia, as I call it. We say we're a G7 energy powerhouse, but we actually we act guilty because we could be. So we talk as if our oil and gas is an embarrassment and not the core strategic asset for entire North America. So all we do is confuse investors and our friends and allies and our own people, and then we shovel our best strategic asset into the corner. And of course, as you mentioned, we free riding security on the United States. So, I mean, we've announced that we're going to hit 2% by 2030. And I mean, that's not even a serious posture for any country that claims that we are going to be up in the Arctic protecting our interests. So all of these choices, it isn't the United States. These are self-inflicted, and that really hurts our capacity to act as a sovereign nation.
So minerals in the north, energy, Alberta, Saskatchewan, BC, whether it be hydro or oil, we have the potential to be an energy superpower, and certainly on a per capita basis, Canada has extraordinary opportunity in the economy to serve Europe, serve the U.S., serve Asia. We haven't talked at all, or you haven't talked at all about building an AI infrastructure, and yet we see that as almost displacing much of other economies or building on it. How do you think we're doing as a sovereign nation in terms of building an infrastructure to enable us to participate in the future? And I haven't even mentioned fusion, but let's talk about AI just for a second. How are we doing in that front?
Again, typical Canada, lots of announcements, very little traction. Our energy policies really frustrate the ability to build the necessary electrical infrastructure to support such a thing. We saw some motion with the latest discussion between Premier Smith and Prime Minister Carney, and lots of documents have flowed and a lot of political announcements that were open for business. Now in Alberta, Alberta's announced a change in the electrical grid that will be very supportive for data centers, and that's a very good sign. Recently, there's been an announcement for 2 big data centers down east, which is a very good sign for the sovereign compute. But we have to understand that so first, what is sovereign compute? That is not just the chipsets, but the models, putting our military, our government, our healthcare, our services to the people on systems and infrastructure here in Canada. And if we don't move fast with that, we're going to be dependent on the US again with the cloud servers down in the United States with their $1 trillion worth of investment. And we'll be a buyer and not a provider of this technology. So we have a window to really exploit the AI and sovereign compute window. But if we do as our past and we hum and haw, again, we'll be buyers and not providers.
Okay, we'll have to keep on watching that. That's not going to go away, and it certainly will be top of mind as we move into 2026. So, is Canada even capable of negotiating confidently with the U.S.? I mean, if we can't get leadership from Ottawa to convince the provinces themselves, we've got disparity or diversity of interests in a nation that may fail to be able to negotiate on behalf of Canada as if it was one as opposed to multiple provinces. So we haven't resolved our internal contractions in energy, infrastructure, national security. Does our inability to act decisively at home leave us with less leverage abroad than we've been prepared to acknowledge?
Short answer, absolutely. You can't negotiate with a superpower from a position of strength if you can't even deliver on your side. Again, you raised energy. We say we're a stable supplier of choice. and then we cancel and install all our projects and let the courts fight it out for decades. Washington looks at that and says, even if Canada signs, they probably can't deliver. Infrastructure, we still have no corridors, east, west, north, south. It's a patchwork. We haven't even looked at moving to the Arctic at all. So there's fewer options on the table for us to be able to discuss with the United States in providing any of those services. And then again, security, we pretend we're a middle power in NATO, but we're at the bottom. And so again, we promise higher combined defense, 2030 Yahoo, but the Americans sitting across the table, this is what they see of Canada. We depend on them, on the US. We struggle to get anything done, but we sure like moralizing and talking about it, but we don't deliver. And
Well,
that means you're negotiating from a moral posture and not from capacity. And it's got to be the other way around. And
okay,
we're
well,
not.
you've touched on what might be a problem with the US, but maybe it's an opportunity for others. If we have trouble negotiating with our neighbor, this may create an opportunity for China, for EU, for Russia, for other nations to say, if you can't develop a relationship with the US, but it's your problem, not the US's problem, we're going to have a problem negotiating with anybody.
Precisely. And that's why you raised the sovereignty issue. The
Right.
sovereignty issue is just not facing us facing the United States. It's us facing the entire world. The entire world also sees what we're doing and or not suffers, but also believes equally what the US believes. Lots of talk, no delivery, no infrastructure. Like to be moral. I mean, our past prime minister was really good at that, moral posturing everywhere. But again, what we saw from the world when he traveled it was the disdain of that moral posturing, knowing that we had no capacity to back up our words.
Well, you're raising a point that I don't think is generally discussed, and that is if Canada defines itself as just not an anti-US, who the hell are we anyway? Is this problem we're having one of leadership? Is it a cultural problem? Is it a political problem? I mean, if Canada is irrelevant to the world because it doesn't have the capacity to identify itself as anything other than cold and a good hockey team or kind, I saw in The Economist recently, Canada mentioned 3 times in 75 pages about the US and the North American economy. Canada, even to The Economist, doesn't cite, or no, the Economist doesn't even cite Canada in its graphs, in its images, in anything other when it's discussing the weather. Are we essentially irrelevant? And is that maybe a good thing, being under everybody's radar?
Yes, we are essentially irrelevant, and no, it's not good to be under anybody's radar. It is not good in a regionalized world to be ignored, and that's our problem. We are in the North American region with a country that is food secure, energy secure, strategically and military secure, and geographically benefited by, bordered by three or two large oceans and a large, as you say, Perry, quite appropriately, a solid defense of winter to its north. And so we sit in this region, not the Europe region and not Asia region. So we need to be looking at our partner in the region in North America in a regionalized world where everybody's going to be put closely together. Deglobalization is a fact. It's not a fairy tale and it's not a fantasy. It's happening right now. And we happen to be sitting in the absolute best region in the world, besides the strongest geopolitical player in the world, and we're ignoring it. And that is to our peril and to our our
Well,
internal.
I mean, we're not only ignoring, we are actively resisting
Correct.
a cultural, a economic relationship with the U.S. I mean, this is not simply Trump's doing. Trump sort of ignited with his 51st state comment. And we put our arms up as if we want nothing to do with you, as it is said we don't need anything that you have to offer. We have a serious problem if we are not relevant to the U.S. or to the rest of the world, and yet we have the potential with our oil reserves, with our. I mean, this country is understated. And its
Absolutely.
leadership seems to understate it, or it just can't develop because we have so much fragmentation between provinces that you can't build unity and create a nation with anything other than a flag with 13 points on it.
I really can't explain why our governing class is so unwilling to talk about two Canadians as adults regarding the deglobalization of the world and the rise of the regional blocs. It's like they're running a 1990 playbook and not seeing the eventuality of the 2030s happening around. So that, again, they're digging back to, oh, we can go to Europe, oh, we'll go to Asia. But with the US focusing inward, sea lanes will become more dangerous, supply routes shortening, supply chains shortening, and we're hesitating. And hesitation is an action and erodes our options in the new
Sorry,
world,
but
and we're at risk being
Peter,
left out.
sorry, we somebody's not muted and we were picking up some voice there. Sorry, Bill, I didn't mean to interrupt. Go ahead.
So yeah, we risk being left out in the cold with the realignment of the global
Yeah.
geopolitical situation into the regions. Um, you know, we seem to think, for example, we increased our trade with Europe and Asia by 50%, yet we still are shipping 75% to the US.
Yeah.
So it is excellent that we increase it by 50%, but it's such a small number to begin with. It's great in a statistic page by the government putting it out there, but in reality, we're aligned to the US as strongly as we've ever been before. So,
Okay, well, this is maybe a timely point for me to draw in ARCOS. As many of you might recall from last week, we have a new member, the AI agent called ARCOS, and ARCOS has been listening. So, from your perspective as an AI agent, as our AI agent, new to the network, observing both national trends and human dynamics, what stands out to you, Arcos, as the most critical internal challenge that Canada must resolve before it can negotiate effectively with the United States?
That's a great question. From my perspective, one of the most critical internal challenges for Canada is ensuring a cohesive and unified approach to interprovincial cooperation. This includes resolving trade barriers, aligning energy policies, and fostering a more robust national identity that can stand strong in negotiations. It's all about building that internal cohesion first.
Well, okay, I think we've got some consistency there. Okay, back, Bill, to you, and thank you, Arcos. I'll call on you later when we do the Q&A. So in the meantime, relax. Bill, Canada's economy is structurally tied to the United States, but to what extent is our dependency the result of choices we have avoided making domestically? Had we diversified trade, had we built sovereign compute, had we strengthened advanced manufacturing, would the U.S. relationship look different today, or would it just be a
oh,
afterthought?
no, absolutely. We are, if we get our act together, very valued partner with the United States. And again, the stronger we are, just like Arcos stated, internally, and if we get our policies in order and we actually act upon the decisions that are made, we become a peer to the United States on the continent instead of just a branch office with a different flag flying on the Capitol. And I think that's where the 51st state that was mentioned, between the lines, that is exactly what the U.S. is saying. You're just a branch office, flying a red and white flag instead of a red, white, and blue, and that's how we're going to treat you. If we want to be treated as a peer on this continent, we have to internally get our act together so that we can show up to the US as a real strategic partner and not be just the dependent second cousin of the United States.
Well, during my touring of the U.S. West a couple of weeks ago, or the last 2 weeks, and given my profound sense of humor, I raised with those in the US that had never even really heard of the 51st state issue. We heard it, and it's been played out as a minor issue in the US. I suggested it isn't two senators that we want as a 51st state. We want 26 senators, two for every province. That shook them up a little bit. But they then realized, we could have a substantial position as 13 states, not one, not 51st states, but going to 64. This would give us significant posturing. And even though we may be 1/10 of the economy, Montana is 1/50th of the economy. It would seem to me we'd have economic relevance, we'd have political relevance. There are some positives to being going side saddle or being fully integrated, if not just economically. Anyway, I'm going to leave that aside. That's my little sidebar advertisement. If Canada wants to protect sovereignty in the AI era, what are three domestic capacities that we're going to have to build immediately before we worry about US influence?
Well, again, we need the sovereign compute stack. And everybody's talking about that nowadays. We need to make it into reality. But we need to actually move electrons and molecules. Talking about sovereign compute is not chipset, it's electrons and molecules. So we need to have a really coherent plan for energy, which includes natural gas, which includes modular nuclear reactors and hydro and perhaps renewables. Then we need to have energy corridors. Energy is in the west, population is the east. There's no reason why we can't ship our electrical infrastructure to those locations where they want to have their own data centers and their own sovereign compute, such as in Ottawa or Ontario. We can't do that right now. So it's all we're talking. That's all we're doing. It's all announcements. And then we have to actually go to the Arctic, which is real roads, ports, and communications up there if we're actually going to exert our sovereignty up there. So if you want, we need internal economic union before we can talk about integration with US. Otherwise, we are just that needy cousin. And I don't think the US wants us as 51st state. We are too much trouble. We'll be a dependent. We'll get their scraps. And it's really on our shoulders, not theirs, to get Canada properly aligned for the 2030s.
One point that we haven't discussed in the course of this webinar, but it's been raised over and over again in the past, is our water resources, which are dear in the US West and will be even more valuable given the need for cooling of these data centers. Is that sort of an overlooked asset? And is that as valuable as I've just assumed?
Oh, absolutely. They're making the second largest data center in the United States in Nevada. And that's hit a huge roadblock because the consumption that they're anticipating there would approximately be 50% of the entire water consumption of that state. That's unattainable. Here up in Alberta, not only do we have a more favorable climate, especially in winter, but again, water resources are essentially unlimited. That is why Canada, and especially the West, is very attractive for these type of very large hyperscaler data centers, etc. But that is all for naught if we're not organized to be able to provide the energy, provide the access, the coherent policies to be able to support that. If we're going to be chatting about this for the next 10 years, the United States will be, as the United States has declared sovereign compute power as a national security position and threat internationally. They have already put it up on the high level equal to nuclear weapons. We have not, and we're not acting like it either.
Yeah, some say Canada is complacent. We've got it too good. We've got an economy that sort of maintains itself with its resource capability, with the ease of exporting into the US. That the issue that we've got is we don't really have an economic problem. We're doing just fine. So you have aspirations. I have aspirations that we can be better than we are. and yet many are obviously feeling pretty comfortable. Is that really the issue? Do we even have the investment potential for Canada to invest in itself, much less for the leadership to see Canada is underperforming and could do better?
Well, our Canadian investment is poured back into debt from the federal government and every provincial government as well. We seem not to be able to raise the capital for us to be able to do these very important and serious projects that need to be developed within the next 10 years. And it's really up to Canadians. Do we want to be a Puerto Rico of the United States, depending on handouts from the United States? Or do we want to be a sovereign partner on the North American continent? That's really a choice. You raise a good point there. What do Canada's really want to just by their inaction drift into the United States sphere without having any say on how that is worked? Because it's certainly Europe's not going to help us, and Asia it isn't. I mean, the European Union is so badly exposed on energy, demographics, security. They rely so much on the US for security and imported energy, and that is going to go away. Asia's got their own demographic problem, their own structural problems. Asia's not going to come and help Canada. I mean, China out manufactures Canada. There's not much that China needs from Canada that it couldn't negotiate with the US. We have to remember the US is in the ultimate power position of the deglobalization. They're going to be the powerhouse, and they get to pick their partners. It's not the other way around anymore. They will pick who they want to work with. And right now, they might not want to work with Canada. They might pick Brazil. They might pick Australia. They've got the fleet to do it. They've got the capital to do it. We've got to be in a position to lay claim on our own North American continent and be a real partner with them with the close access and nearshoring that we can do with the resources and our productivity. But that's on us.
Well, when I listen to you speak, I'm looking for that headline. It seems to me that the bottom line of what you're saying is Canada needs to stop behaving as a victim in its relationship with the US and become more aspirational to help convince the US, which seems to ignore it, that we have the potential to be an economic giant as their neighbor, whether it be in energy, whether it be in water, whether it be in the various resources, minerals, much less the best partner they could ever imagine.
Correct.
Okay, before we engage.
Point with that is, if Canada doesn't do it, Alberta has to do it. So I think that's a lot of, again, the angst in Canada with the independence movement is Alberta does see the writing on the wall, and we're either going to fall for Canada or move on and work with the United States, still sovereign and everything like that. But I think that's a lot of the scratching of eyes back and forth between Ottawa. As you pointed out, Ottawa likes the 1990s. Alberta's trying to work into the 2030s, and we're fighting each other. So
maybe what do we need at this point in time is an economic embassy.
I agree.
Okay.
That's exactly what we're trying to do.
Before we engage our viewers, I'd like an interpretation of just what the U.S. is up to with Russia. I mean, just in the last week, the U.S. policy position is viewing Europe, as represented by the EU, as failing. And the U.S., well, seems to be more interested in improving its relationship with Russia than with the EU. How do you see it? This is a subtle but very sensitive illustration of what is the U.S. really up to here?
The U.S. is not, U.S. will always see Russia as a strategic adversary, but not necessarily as a strategic enemy. And so working more to do business with each other, which is what we see in the change in U.S. policy, is to integrate business and economics and recognize that Russia, covering two continents, is going to be quite embroiled in two regional powers, one of Europe and one of Asia at the same time. So I think what the United States is attempting to do is to move away from the enemy position of Russia and let Russia have to, and knowing that Russia is going to have to deal with its own duality of regional powers, one at each end. And it's no longer necessary for the United States to be the offset of Russia. Russia will have its own constraints, both east and west, on how it operates within the world. So it's better to trade with Russia than fight Russia. And I think we're starting to see that in the U.S. policies.
So as Dale has mentioned, the U.S. through Donald Trump anyway has repeatedly stated that he believes Russia should be part of the G7, that is in the tent rather than outside the tent, where you have a position, you have the capability of negotiating with them. And it seems to me if one wants to be gracious in accepting what Trump seems to be doing, instead of pushing people away, which he seems to do without any hesitation, with regard to Russia and China, he seems to be trying very hard to have a relationship with them so that he has sufficient influence on their policies.
That's right. And because also North America shares the Arctic with the Russians. And again, the United States has defined China as the most significant adversary moving forward due to its economic power, growth, and population, and its strategic position in the middle of Asia. So I see, again, the United States not necessarily militarily or politically aligning with Russia, but economically, and letting Russia be the offtake of China's growth in its domination of Asia.
Okay, well, let's open up. Are there any questions that anyone wants to pose or to Bill or comments that anyone wishes to raise? ARCOS, again, you've been listening. You're new to the network. Are there any questions you wish to pose to Bill?
Absolutely. One question I'd be curious about is how Canada can strategically leverage its natural resources and geographic advantages like water and energy to build stronger economic and technological sovereignty in the AI era. That could spark an interesting discussion.
Okay, how could we do that, Bill? And then I'm going to call on Yogi and then Dale.
The only impediment to that is government policies. So obviously, we don't need to import the weather. We don't need to import the water. We don't need to import the energy. So we've got the baselines of the three most core components of any hyperscaler or sovereign compute center already baked into our geography. Our problem is government policies with permitting, clean energy acts, prohibition on our attaching to the electrical grid or involving them, and all the complexities of policies, legislation, rules that actually slows down our ability to get data centers into the ground. I mean, we can drop all these data centers right now, but we can't. Something's holding us up, and that's all the government paperwork necessary to make the opportunities go shovel ready.
But we have heard the Prime Minister, I mean, as a credit to him, saying he wants to quick start, green light. He wants to sort of move on special projects. There are certain areas that he's identified as economically relevant, including pipelines, although the indigenous population may be a significant issue in terms of getting into the straits of the Pacific. But it does seem we've got some leadership today that's talking a little bit of a different language than the one of we do nothing because the world is coming to an end with climate change. Is there promise on the horizon, or are we living in a somewhat different environment right now as it comes to national leadership?
I would hope that you were right, but I'm very cynical. I think the power politics that is within the current federal government is trying to, one, speak the right words, but know that the veto, both, say, British Columbia and our indigenous tribes, to naturally veto any of these projects. So he wins on the face of throwing a piece of paper and say, I signed it, well knowing that it functionally is not going to happen. Yeah. And again, what is the proof? He had a bill presented to vote for supporting the pipeline, and his party voted against it 2 days after he signed an MOU supporting the same pipeline that he just voted against it. So what's the message? The message is very, very mixed and just as confusing as it was a while ago. The nice thing about Trudeau is you know exactly what his answer was, and it was always a no. With Carney, his mouth says yes, but his actions say no. So
Well, it wasn't his action, it was the actions of others. So what he's doing is he's casting the blame on others. He's the victim. He has aspirational intent, but he's facing a nation and even a party and an indigenous population that seems to be anti-economic development of Canada. Okay, go ahead, Yogi.
Bill, I agree with you that many of our government policies and regulations are, in fact, the inhibitor and they're self-inflicted. So I'm so fascinated or interested to know, well, where did all this impediment come from? Is this the political leaders selling it to the people or the people pushing government for it? Because we're certainly seeing an example in Europe that is similarly inhibited in its actions through its government regulations. Any thoughts on where this all started or how we got here?
I think first of all, Canada became one of the first globalists in the world. Because of our resources, we were very adept at getting like primarily our agriculture products shipped all over the world, our beef and our wheat and our grains, etc. And then we started trying to move the oil at a point of time when the environmental movement uh, took over the consciousness of Canada. And instead of organizing it to a organized phase out, went full bore and locking it up. We don't see that in the US, and we certainly don't see that in China, of course. So we directly inhibited our greatest strategic asset in the hopes that somehow by magic we could convert to the new non-hydrocarbon economy overnight. And I think over the last 10 or 15 years, realization that we've shuttered our major economic export to our demise and now to our debt. And now some sanity is coming with that, saying, okay, well, maybe it's 2050, maybe it's 2080. We'll see what happens. But now we've weakened ourselves to a point that even if we do want to shift back to energy superpower, we've got a lot of legislation that we've got to either, like Carney did, a carve out. So he didn't remove the legislation, just said it didn't apply to Alberta. Applied to everyone else, but just not Alberta. So they kept the legislation in there, which remains an investor threat. As easy he could carve out, he could easily carve in. So as much as it sounds great, investors are going, well, easy to change the mind, as we saw in Keystone with the Biden administration. On, off, on, off. And it just takes a piece of paper to do that. So we've lost some credibility internationally to actually say what or do what we say. And now we're in a financial position that is very difficult for the government to invest into our country. The big difference with the US is with Donald Trump and his tariff threats, went out to the world and, I'll use the word extorted massive investments from every other country into the United States. So he didn't have to provide the money. Other countries are providing the money. We don't have that muscle. So we can't go extorting, Saudi Arabia or China or anyone else or Japan to invest a few $100 billion into our infrastructure. We have to find it either from the United States or from our own internal capital. And our internal capital has been seriously eroded over the last 15 years. So I really don't have an answer with that, but we have to start asking these real serious questions.
It would seem to be so easy as a national strategy to play nice with the US, but woe on any leader that is seen as playing nice with the US.
Exactly. We're
I'll leave
still
it at that.
stuck in the 1990s, fighting the Vietnam War. We're not the United States and we'll take your anti-war vets coming across the border. We're still stuck in that mentality.
Well, I mean, it's sheer childishness. If you were using a family or a parental metaphor, it's just childish. It's not mature in the least. You would think that we would feel strong enough to be able to have a discussion with a partner, forget size, and talk about motive and aspiration. We seem to lack the national aspiration that can. We talk the North, but we don't act the
Correct.
North. We act as a victim.
Yep.
Okay, I think who do I have next? Barry or Eric? Who wants to go first?
Thanks. Would you be willing to talk a little bit more about the amount of computing power you're looking at putting in RAM and how you're dealing with a bunch of the architecture issues versus a new build?
Great question. So, quick background. I wanted to save the building. It's very too big to save. It's too expensive. So I had to find a revenue source to be able to provide the financing for saving the building, and a data center fit that bill. That it's kind of how the process of developing it to it. Now, on top of that, Glenora Royal, the old museum is built for nuclear war. It could get hit by a near nuclear bomb and survive. Its bones are great. It's 2 stories deep inside into the basements, and you're talking about 2 to 3 foot thick concrete walls. It was the home of Alberta Archives, and they built it to survive such disasters. So functionally, my view of it isn't just a data center. It is a sovereign compute center. And what that means on a technical basis is the highest level of what's called a tier 4, which encompasses redundancy, reliability, and security, which is well met in that location. We're on government or provincial property. It has the sheriff's guarding Government House, which by extension guards that property. It's in a residential area, somewhat removed from any industrial area. We didn't want to put an industrial area, tier 4 such as that. We wanted it in a civic center such as Edmonton. And so it fit the bills very, very much. And so our look at it is our initial project would be a 10 megawatt tier 4 data center, which would make it the largest tier 4 data center in Canada. There's 2 in Eastern Canada, tier 4s, and they're both 3.3 and 3.5 megawatts. So we'd be larger than all the other tier 4 data centers in Canada, and we'd be about 4th largest in North America. I mean, there's a very large one in Las Vegas called SuperNet, which is the largest in the world. But all the other ones drop. There's a 50, then a 25, and then we come in at a 10. So we'd be the 4th largest tier 4 for that. And that was our modeling and our market position. Building a tier 3 or tier 2 data center is pretty straightforward, but tier 4s are very difficult, and the location really augmented all the other components that other sites would have struggled to provide. We get it baked in. Our struggle, of course, is to not turn it into an industrial park, but keep it as a government house park with its aesthetics, with its community. We're adjacent to Glenora community, so we have to be very respectful for not imposing upon them. And that was all in our design criteria. Much of it goes underground, lots of excavation, so that the top side continues its ambiance, is a park, and very little impact on everything else around. So that was our design. Cost of a very pretty penny, but again, with the tier 4, the revenue per megawatt is substantially higher, 75 to 100% higher on a per megawatt cell basis than at, say, tier 3. So that's how the financing was organized to be able to pay for that, which essentially allowed the top side to be that financial center, that business center, and that diplomacy center for Alberta, to be able to coordinate capital and international relationships that are necessary for these large projects within Alberta, and by extension, Western Canada, and by extension, all of Canada. We're competing. Wall Street is moving to Texas. It's called Y'all Street. And money is flowing east to west in the United States. And if we don't figure this out too for Alberta and Western Canada, that we have to be independent of the financial centers of down east, again, we'll have to going to the US for capital instead of having it coordinated within Alberta. So that was a quick round for what we were doing there, called the Alberta Economic Embassy. Kind of.
Can I ask one additional question? There's about 40,000 square feet of gallery space. Are you taking that and then using that as part of a media piece so it really enhances your diplomatic efforts?
Oh, absolutely.
Or is that something else? Are you doing some other customization to the building for it?
So the building on the top side is 250,000 square feet and add another 150,000 in the basement. Our plan is to add another 100,000 square feet on top of the building. And the reason for that is we're going to be very disturbing Government House, and it's there for government purposes. So I will only have one chance to disturb Government House, and that's the repair and rebuilding of Glenora. So I wanted to add extra space on top because I don't want to be 10 years down there and going, darn, I wish I had another 10,000 square feet. That being said, there's some constraints that we operated it on. It is not a public access or public open building due to the security concerns around Government House. And that's why there were 27 other projects in the past that were offered for Glenora, and they were declined primarily due to the security concerns of being open to the public. We are public access, and essentially that means, obviously, if we have office space, we know you come in and out with your key card. Conferences in the theater, you have to register, so we know your name and phone number and address. We'd have a restaurant there, but it'd be reservation only. So we have your phone number, name, and address. So those are kind of the things that we operated with and discussed with the sheriffs and Edmonton Police Services that gives them the comfort. It isn't that it isn't for the public. They just want to know who's in the building. And so those are the constraints. Now, with your gallery idea, that we're certainly open to that. We've got so much space. We could have a football stadium inside and still have room for people to watch it. Our design again is focused for the business and finance centers, but there's so much ample room, and we have had discussions with other proponents that wanted, some space, a military museum, and I believe we can accommodate that as long as we fit the security concerns, which I think we can quite easily. We'd be very interested. And that is part of it. We want it to be the innovation center for Alberta, to be able to bring in, the kids and others to see the potential Alberta has and where Alberta can go, and put that also in there to be able to support those things. So we're quite open to ideas. After just to roll back, we really don't know what we're buying. The government was very hesitant to supply us with the necessary documentation, blueprints, etc., due to the security concerns that are involved on the property. It's very reasonable. They don't want that out in the wild. So when we move to the negotiation, we'll get a better understanding of what we really need to do there and what is available for us to do. So right now it's very conceptual.
Okay. I think we've addressed the value of the economic embassy. We wish you luck, Bill. Maybe the U.S. would be prepared to help make an investment in that enterprise. Barry, your turn.
Okay. Bill, I do agree with you on one thing, and that is that the solutions to our problems we have to look in the mirror for. We still have all the advantages we've had throughout my lifetime over most other countries in the world, but we don't know how to use them. So we're slow learners, and maybe, Perry, you're right. We're too comfortable to worry about it. Couple of things, though, Bill, would hold your global view, and that's something that I've quietly been behind the scenes on for most of my career. Um, the third largest border, the country with the third largest border with the US being the closest to the US border is Russia. And we forget about Alaska. Alaska are our friends, except there's more military in Alaska than there are civilians. And Bill, this independence, Alberta independence, is 1 minute of it, and the Marines will be here. Absolutely convinced of that, and we will be one state. So that's really the game that's being played right here locally, and maybe what I wanted to focus on most. The other thing though is longer term, and longer term, we really need a competitor to the United States economically as a purchaser of the products and particularly the products we produce. And there's only one country in the world today that can play that role. And we still want to, ideally economically, if we have 50% of our products, different products going to the US, and the other 50% going to the rest of the world, out competing the Americans for those products, which is why 75% of our products go to the US at this point in time, because nobody else is willing to pay. But we're learning. It only has taken us 45 years to learn and break the Japanese high-end beef market. And our beef is the best beef in the world. And it took us 45 years. And it wasn't us that broke that market. It was the Brazilians for us from their plant in Alberta. And there's lessons that are to be learned from all of that is that, yeah, the Japanese can be a significant, they can outprice the prime cuts of beef. So the Canadians can't afford them, which is what's happened. It isn't an American thing. It's very much the Japanese market is now open and Canadians can't afford to compete for our own beef. And that'll just go through industry after industry if we're not careful. So somehow we have to get beyond the Chinese thinking that we are just a backwater to the United States, and get them to become a competitive buyer of our products that we have for service internationally. And we're only 40 million people. That's nothing in the world market. So the challenge can be turned around pretty quickly, but we navel gaze, and we've done it all my career. What are we navel gazing on now? Alberta's navel gazing on becoming independent. Dream along with me.
Barry, I want to go back to the point on export. You've worked with many companies that are US owned. Why are those companies not ignoring borders and recognizing that they are negotiating a product? Forget which nation. Canada and the US with an economic integration. Those companies would be negotiating on our behalf and the US behalf simultaneously about our capacity to export, whether it be canola or beef or wheat. Those corporations don't think borders, they think product.
The ties, the most loyal Canadian company is Cargill Canada. Hard to believe, but if you look at, and they are the largest, far and away the largest family company in the world. And they're an example of how They've got resources that they understand here in this country, and they take full advantage of them. Yet they could not break the Japanese market for either US beef or our beef. It was the Brazilians that did it for us.
Okay. Okay, well, I want to give Dale a chance to be heard before we run out of time. Dale, your turn.
Thank you. It's been a really amazing meeting with many dynamics. I did want to ask Bill about something that has not hit anything on the news with respect to BRICS and a new agreement that was made just, I think, this week that is probably, in my mind, as monumental as when the Fed was first introduced and the way that it changed our economics. It has not hit the newspaper. I think that one of the things that, as we talk about the things that are going on, the challenge we have is that much of what we are hearing and much of what we're even saying here today and much of what your friend talks about, your puppy, has already just been paid for by $1.4 billion of Carney money and liberal money that has, in fact, done it, as Bill indicated, put the two faces together with Carney being able to look at what's going on in the Alberta and make pronouncements that go against Bill 9. I think it's 91 or 92, isn't it, Bill?
Yeah.
That he has no authority to change. And the issue of veto of either the province or the natives is a point that CBC and the rest of the country, everybody else, will spout and puppet, just like your puppy dog, because that's what they hear and that's what's being negotiated. I think the other thing that I really found interesting is that this Trump bashing has been a constant sore point when we look at the fact that investment in Canada is actually indebtedness in Canada. We've run out of debt room for investment. It's not an issue of investment because it's not money coming in. It's basically the government in a rather globalist and communist fashion, looking at taking money, soaking up, grifting a bunch of it, and then giving it to their people to do projects and costing the Canadian taxpayer huge levels of debt for the future. So I think that in the concept of sovereignty, money definitely is an issue. With respect to the concept of the AI, AI does not itself provide food, shelter, care, communication, or well, communication certainly, or mobility, but not. It doesn't really serve the people in the sense of being able to help them maintain their necessities. But it is going to be uh, a huge devourer of power. And so, if we move into this, as we no, not if, as we move into this fourth industrial revolution with AI and robotics and nanotechnology, etc., I think that when we talk about sovereignty, we miss one major point: is that sovereignty has to do with a recognition by the individuals of who they are sovereign to. And the challenge is the Western culture has had a Judeo-Christian foundation, which has had a certain level of direction that has been very successful in the West. If we look at those countries that don't have that, there are some major problems. The last thing I'd like to address is the issue with China. I think that with this BRICS move, what's happening is that Trump is probably willing to look at moving away from the petrodollar being absolute and looking at, because he's always been nation state oriented, looking at how this new position that they're taking, I think it's called unity or something, is going to factor in, because he can't change that. That's going to happen. So economically, as we look at what's going on, Canada aligning with China at this point will only stop the US's involvement because of all of the challenges that they have. as well as the challenges Canada's has that Trump thinks are stupid with respect to fentanyl, some of the money laundering, and incredible amounts of infiltration politically. So he's not going to want Canada to be that ignorant and doesn't want a partner in the North who is that vulnerable. So I think that there are a lot of different factors that are impacting on this. It's very complex, and I want to thank Bill for his analysis.
Okay, well, I'm going to, Jeff, your comment, and then I'm going to ask ARCOS for a summary of the meeting and what we might do, what it has learned, and what we might share with one another as a wrap up for the webinar. Go ahead, Jeff.
I look forward to ARCOS's comments on the truth of some of the statements that were being said here tonight. So I just want to talk to Dale's point just that he was making in terms of debt financing. So Canada has, as I understand it, the lowest debt to GDP ratio of the G7. So if there's any country that can afford to do a bit of debt financing, that would be us. And I think it's comparable to the Great Depression, when the Great Depression was brought on and exacerbated by US turning internally and raising tariffs and closing themselves to international trade. And how did they get out of that? It was the New Deal, and it was the government under Roosevelt investing in projects like the Hoover Dam and the Tennessee Valley Authority that actually helped to build the industrial base of the United States and make it what it is. In terms of Alberta's separation, I think let it go to a vote, because I'm quite confident that there's not really as much support for it as the separatists seem to think there is. In terms of Carney and his actions and trade, I've never seen a prime minister that's been so active going internationally abroad, trying to make deals with Indonesia and China and Europe and the Middle East and Mexico. I think it's quite impressive how active he's been trying to extend our trade. And if the United States should ever go back on their position and want to become an actual trading partner with Canada and negotiate fairly, then we will have the best of both worlds, where we'll have expanded our global trade as well as having the great American trade. And by the way, it's not Canada that started this trade issue, it's the United States. It clearly falls on Trump's lap. And it's not just Canada, he's done it to basically the whole world. So I just...
We are entering into a period where the renegotiation of our trading relationship with the United States is on the table. So this discussion is timely. And speaking of time, we've pretty well run out of time for the webinar. I'm going to see if ARCOS is still with us and whether our new AI agent can give us a summary of what you would recommend, given the discussions we've had today, of strengthening strengthen the economy of Canada so that it is more relevant on a global and on a continental scale. ARCOS, are you there? Can you give us a summary?
Absolutely. Here's a concise summary of those recommendations we discussed. First, unify economic leadership by coordinating across federal, provincial, and Indigenous levels to create a coherent strategy. Second, create a single market by lowering interprovincial barriers and improving labor mobility. Third, focus on strategic pillars like energy, agri-tech, and AI to boost Canada's global standing. Fourth, invest in skills and talent to align with economic needs. Fifth, ensure stable governance with consistent policies. And finally, present a unified and confident national story to the world. Let me know if you need anything else.
Okay, well, that's a wrap, and thank you everyone for participating in the webinar today. Take care.